Welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, and I got him in the booth. Yes, yes, yes. I'll bring him in, but I have to say this, and I'm so embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed. I'm waiting for Dimitri, right? And I'm in the wrong studio, and I'm looking around. I'm like, oh my God, the time is counting down, and I'm realizing I'm in tomorrow's studio for the next guest, and I'm like, in like 1 minute and like 30 some seconds, and it dawned on me that I was in the wrong studio. And I'm like, when I get back to the studio with Demetrius, he might think that the show is canceled or whatever. So I am so sorry. So let me bring him in. Dimitri, how's it going?
Good, Rich. It sounds like it's Back to the Future, brother.
Thank you. Hey man, thank you for joining me. Would you tell my audience a little bit about yourself? We know that you're from Canada, you're a lawyer, you're an activist and all of that. Would you tell the people, before we get into our discussion, would you tell the people a little bit about yourself and what
Sure.
you like to do?
So I was born and raised in Canada, and then went to law school there, and I actually started my legal career not in Canada but in New York City, back in the early '90s, a long time ago. Spent a few years there working for a big corporate law firm. Then they packed me off to their Paris office. Went there for a couple of years, and then I decided that was a soul-crushing experience. So I left the practice of law for a few years. Did something that was rather unusual. I became a professional blackjack player. With a bunch of other disgruntled people on Wall Street, bankers and lawyer types. So I did that for a few years, and then I returned to the practice of law in Canada in 2004, and I became a class actions lawyer. And I went to the other side and started representing basically individuals and union pension funds and litigation against corporations and their directors and officers for securities fraud mostly. But I also started doing some human rights work and some environmental work. Then I retired from the practice of law in 2015, at least class actions law. I started doing a lot of pro bono work. I became politically involved in 2020. I ran for the Green Party of Canada leadership. There were 8 candidates, and I finished second with 45% of the vote on the last ballot. So we came very close to winning, and I ran explicitly as an eco-socialist. We can get into what that means if you want, but basically that was my platform, and I was pleasantly surprised that we managed to get so close to winning, because in Canada socialism is a dirty word, despite what people say about Canada. And then afterwards, I decided to disengage from politics pretty much, and to focus myself on activism. And since this war began it really began in 2014, but the large-scale land war that is taking place between Russia and Ukraine began 18 months ago. I've pretty much been devoting myself on a full-time basis to writing about it, researching it, and urging my fellow citizens to stop supporting the escalation of this war and to try to bring it to an end by peaceful negotiation, because I think, at the very least, this is going to result in the destruction of Ukraine, which is the country we're supposed to be helping. And at the very worst, it's going to result in a nuclear war. So for me, this has been pretty much my number one priority for the last 18 months.
Well, why do you think the West is so invested in this war? And why do you think that they hide the links to fascism and Nazism, and they continue to harp on this line that no one is biting on, and that this war was unprovoked and is purely Russian aggression?
Well, this is all about hegemony, man. That's what this is all about. When the Soviet Union, from the demise of the end of the Second World War up until the demise of the Soviet Union, there were 2 superpowers in the world. This, I think most of us who were alive then understood this perfectly well: the Soviet Union and the United States. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in the early '90s, the United States found itself in a position that I think was really without precedent in human history. It was not just the most powerful country in the world, but its power was of global reach. And it enjoyed a position of pretty much of unchallenged global hegemony, from the early '90s right up until, I'd say, the mid-2000s and 10s, when China emerged as an economic superpower. And also, when Russia began to sort of rehabilitate itself under the government of Vladimir Putin from the disastrous decade of Boris Yeltsin's rule. So now all of a sudden, the United States found itself challenged by potentially two peer states, peer economies, peer militaries. And the neocons in Washington decided that this is just something they weren't prepared to tolerate. They weren't prepared to tolerate a scenario in which the United States government was in a position to impose its will on anybody around the world. And I want to be very clear about this, Rasheed. This is not about the United States people. The people of the United States are as oppressed as many of the peoples around the world where the neocons are doing their dirty business. Mm-hmm. The United States government doesn't act in the interests of the American people, in my opinion. I lived there long enough to see with my own eyes, walk in the streets of New York, Baltimore, Washington, Los Angeles, Chicago. I've been all over the United States, and it's absolutely crystal clear to anybody who takes the time to see with his or her own eyes what's happening on the street, that the U.S. government does not serve the interests of the American people. And American foreign policy doesn't serve the interests of the American people. It serves the interests of the oligarchy, of the billionaire class. It's their power that this war is designed to preserve. And why do they hide the fact that, Ukraine's government and military, are infiltrated by neo-Nazis? Because, of course, if we in the West understood that that was true, we would rebel against our government's policies towards this war. Because most people, thankfully, in our societies, despite all of the indoctrination, want absolutely nothing to do with Nazism or neo-Nazism.
As you were talking, I was just thinking over some of the government officials in the West and their lineage and their connection with Nazism, like in Canada, Chrystia Freeman, her grandfather. And this should be like front page news of the connection with Nazism and what just happened in the Canadian Parliament and what is going on in Ukraine, and likewise with some of the officials in the United States and how they came up through the ranks, and some of them are related to people who tried to overthrow Roosevelt for a fascist dictatorship in the United States. A lot of people don't know about that, but why do you think it is suppressed so much, and why do you think that the people are so naive and so easily led by the government to accept this? Because you see governments in the Middle East, how corrupt they may be, governments in Africa, some governments in Europe, they would overthrow their government. They would be out on the streets on it, like what's going on in Japan and Korea that's never publicized. They have had constant protests about U.S. bases, U.S. Birthing rights to ports and stuff. Yet in the West, in the United States and Canada in particularly, there's no major uproar about both governments spending towards a Ukraine war while the people, the masses of the people, are suffering.
Well, our leaders love to talk about disinformation coming from foreign governments, and particularly the Chinese and the Russian governments. I just laugh whenever I hear these. I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Chinese government, the Russian government, are in various clever ways trying to influence public opinion with disinformation. I'm sure that they are to some degree, but there is no propaganda system anywhere on planet Earth, and I would go so far as to say, as any point in human history, that is as effective and powerful as the U.S. propaganda system, which now prevails over the entire Western world. We in Canada are consuming as much propaganda from the U.S. propaganda system as our brothers and sisters in the United States. And this system, Rasheed, it works in ways that, most people aren't even conscious of. So, for example, what we call entertainment, the stuff that's being produced by Hollywood, it's pretty much propaganda masquerading as, entertainment. What we call advertisement is corporate propaganda. We don't call it propaganda, but that's what it is. A lot of the music that we listen to on radios is propaganda. I remember, I used to love, for example, listening in my younger days to Tupac Shakur. A lot of his music was revolutionary. You don't hear that on the radio anymore.
Right.
Very, very little. I mean, there's almost no revolutionary music allowed on radio anymore. So we are being, even when you go to like I go to watch Toronto Raptors from time to time in Toronto. You walk into the stadium, the Air Canada Centre, this big glitzy center, and you're just literally drowning in propaganda all around you. You're like a captive audience, and they're bombarding you between, every time that there's a stop in the action with corporate advertisements. And they'll bring out people from the Canadian military, and they'll do their thing on the marching band. It's to try to inspire Canadians to support the Canadian military. So we're literally drowning in it. It's everywhere all the time. And a lot of it we're not even conscious of. We don't even consider it to be propaganda. And as a result, the government gets away with the most outrageous lies. The most outrageous lies. We need to stop focusing in our countries on the disinformation that's being disseminated by foreign governments in their own countries, and start paying real close attention to disinformation that it's being jammed down our throats 24/7. That's causing us to make decisions that are not in our own interests, that are in the interests of the oligarchy. And that's got to come to an end if we're going to make any progress in our societies.
I think about that, and you're hitting so many points. I think about how the United States says Russian government funded propaganda when it talks about news outlets or Chinese funded propaganda news outlets, and then you have U.S. funded news outlets, but those are supposed to be free and balanced and fair. When the government dictates what's going on, they give you a certain amount in your budget that you have to that they allot for certain things to be said, and then there's a revolving door for government officials and military officials who leave their posts to become spokesmen and pundits and analysts on these TV and radio shows, and they don't consider that propaganda. I think the minds are so inundated with imperial hubris that it is now seeping down into the minds of the people without a second thought. They believe that America is still America from 20 years ago, and China is still China from 20 years ago, and Russia is still that broken part of the Soviet Union from 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And in reality, the world has changed. And if you look at it, the world is moving on from dollar hegemony. In saying that, could that be one of the main reasons, one of the main antagonists that is causing the Western world to lash out and stoke tensions on Russia's borders, on China's borders, on Iran's borders, to try to maintain that fleeting hegemony that it once had?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, one country you didn't mention, which I'm cognizant of it quite a bit nowadays because something that happened in Canada, and that's India. Our prime minister, before he absolutely disgraced himself by giving a standing ovation to an out-and-out Nazi in Canada's parliament, leveled an accusation against the government of India, the Modi government, that it had assassinated a Sikh activist on Canadian soil. Now, I've written an article about this, a long article, where I look in depth at the allegation and the so-called evidence that's been proffered by the Canadian government. And the picture, I'm not going to get into the details because it's a long discussion, but I think that the most plausible interpretation of why that accusation has been leveled against the government of India is that the Biden administration is basically using the Trudeau government, which is a vassal of Washington. Let's just call it what it is. It's a vassal, to make life difficult for the Modi government. And the reason why Biden has an interest in doing that is because the Modi government has been enthusiastically participating in BRICS and the expansion of BRICS.
Yes.
The leaders of BRICS are talking, overtly and enthusiastically about bringing the era of U.S. dollar hegemony to an end. They're talking about ending the use of the U.S. dollar in trade between BRICS members. They now have, if you look at the combined GDP of the BRICS nations, they rival, if not surpass, depending upon how you measure GDP, the GDP of the G7. The energy resources, now that you've brought Saudi Arabia, Iran into the BRICS, you already have Russia in there. The energy resources of the BRICS vastly surpass those of the G7. So, it's not just about military power. It's even more so about economic power. The project of U.S. global hegemony and Western hegemony cannot be sustained if the U.S. dollar loses its role as the global reserve currency, and they know that. The United States government will not be able to borrow obscene sums of money to fund the military-industrial complex. You know, the cost of its debt is going to go way up if the demand for the dollar goes down, and that's exactly the trend that we are currently witnessing, thanks in large part to the BRICS governments. And so this isn't just about Russia. It's not just about China. It's about all of the countries within the BRICS that have decided they want to break from the era of U.S. global hegemony and introduce an era of what they call multipolarity.
And, you know, I think another element in that India story is that the United States was angling for a major weapon sales package to India, including the souped up F-16s or souped up F-15s.
The lemon.
Yeah. Well, you said it right. I was going to be diplomatic about it, but you said it right. And India is shifting, and they're starting to listen to Russia about where their interest lies, especially when it comes to China in this border issue. And I believe that they're using this Canadian so-called assassination on Canadian soil as a huge amount of pressure on India, because if you listen to the U.S. Government's response and the Canadian government response, it was tantamount almost to a warning, and a severe warning, because think about it in these terms. If they push that further, they can then justify and say that this was an act of aggression against a NATO member, and meaning that they could invoke Article 5. And this is what they're putting India on notice, not to veer too far into the sphere of the BRICS Plus. I believe that's one of the elements. What do you think on that?
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's, I hadn't thought about the NATO angle, but that's absolutely at least an implicit message. If you commit a political killing on Canadian soil, are they capable of constructing an argument that Article 5 of the NATO treaty has been triggered? Sure, they're capable of doing that, and I'm sure that the Indian government is perfectly cognizant of that fact. I think at the end of the day, look, and by the way, I want to be clear. It's possible that the Modi government is behind the killing of this individual. His name is Nijar. And why do I say that? Because the Modi government, rightly or wrongly, had identified him as a terrorist. That's what they claimed him to be. So is it beyond the realm of possibility that they did it? No, it's not beyond the realm of possibility. But as I pointed out in the article that I wrote about this, there's nobody on God's green earth that engages in extraterritorial assassination as much as the United States government. I mean, come on. And the second most, and maybe even worse, arguably, is Israel, which receives $3.8 billion a year in military aid from the United States government. They've been running roughshod all over the world, killing people. And in fact, when they killed the person, I think it was last year, the Biden administration announced that they had killed, I think his name is Al Washiri, but I'm probably mispronouncing it. He was reputed to be the leader of Al-Qaeda, and they killed him on foreign soil, and Justin Trudeau openly praised Biden for this. In the Biden administration, the Trump administration murdered on Iraqi soil, I believe it was in 2018, Iran's top general, a man by the name of Soleimani, killed 9 other people in that attack with a Hellfire missile, some of whom were Iraqis. This was on Iraqi soil without the consent of the Iraqi government. The Trudeau government did not say shit about this killing, even though it almost ignited a war between Iran and the United States. And at the time, Canada had 500 soldiers in Iraq, and they were on an American base that was attacked by the Iranians in retaliation. They were put in harm's way, and the Trump administration didn't even give an advance warning that they were going to do this. Yet we didn't hear a peep of condemnation from the Canadian government. But when it happens on Canada soil, oh my God, it's an unspeakable outrage. And all of us in Canada are supposed to get up and, condemn the Indian government. These are crimes wherever they happen, Rasheed. It's not just a crime on Canadian soil. It's a crime when it happens in Iraq. It's a crime when it happens in Afghanistan. It's a crime wherever it happens. And if you're not prepared to condemn it in all circumstances, then nobody should take you seriously when you do.
Mute my mic again. Okay. I think a lot of that goes to the hubris, the imperial hubris. Do as I say, not as I do. And if you do as I do, then we're going to bring pressure to bear to vilify you so that we can weaken you politically. I believe that's the mind state of the West, and they are trapped in this mind state, which is causing them to alienate the very people that keep them afloat through the buying of their bonds, their debt, which is absolutely insane to me. That is this is like this, Dimitri. I'm relying on you to pay my light bill. I'm relying on you to pay my mortgage. I'm relying on you to pay my car note and to give me money every month so that my family can eat and do other things. And every time you leave home, you find when you come back, you find that a window is broken. You look on your camera and see that I'm the one that came in and stole this and went out. Sooner or later, you're going to confront me about that, and then you're going to say, you know what? I have come to the realization that I just cannot help you anymore. And regardless of what you say, position that you're in, you don't want to be helped. So from this point on, I'm cutting you off. That's, to me, that is what it seems like the world is now doing because of the irrational, lunatic policies of not just America, but the entire Western world as we know it.
Yeah, I've got this saying, which I the older I get, the more I think this is true. And that saying is impunity makes people stupid. So because the US government and its vassals have gotten away quite literally with murder for decades with no accountability whatsoever, absolutely no accountability, they have become incredibly hubristic. And they think that no matter how badly they screw up, how outrageous their behavior is, how careless, how reckless it is, there'll never be any consequences. And we're seeing this in dramatic right now, as you say. I mean, a perfect example of this is the German government. The German government cutting off the supply of relatively cheap Russian gas, which was a pillar of the German economic model over the last 20 years. Without that gas, Germany's toast. It's absolutely toast. And they actually believed that this sanctions regime they were imposing on Russia was going to work, even though Russia's commodities, its natural resources, are absolutely indispensable to the sustenance of the global economy. You know, its agricultural resources, its energy resources, it's water, it's wood, it's minerals, go on and on and on. These things are necessary to the healthy function of the global economy. Cutting Russia off from the global economy was doomed to be a disaster for countries around the world, including countries in the West, particularly Germany. And they did it anyways, Rasheed. They did it anyways. And even today, when we see the effects of this, Germany's economy is going down the toilet. They still won't reverse course. They still won't try to repair the relationship with Russia. They still won't try to restore the energy relationship with Russia. Instead, the stupid-ass German government is now buying huge amounts of LNG from the United States, which is far more expensive and also is far more polluting. And they're doing this even though one of the coalition partners is the so-called Green Party of Germany, which is supposed to be focused on, environmental responsibility. So the level, there's no shortage of stupidity in the halls of power in the West nowadays. That's for damn sure.
Man, I'm telling you, you hit on a lot when you said that. And I think about with these sanctions, America issued sanctions, and then she becomes one of the largest buyers of. Now she's prohibiting everybody else from buying Russian resources, and she's become one of the largest buyers of Russian gas, one of the largest buyers of Russian oil, one of the largest buyers of Russian fertilizer, and all of this stuff. But if you buy it, you fall under the sanctions list. Even her allies are not immune to being sanctioned and being brought down economically. With a friend like that, who needs enemies?
I've been saying that for years, man. We need to redefine what it means to be an ally, because the people we call allies are, just doing the most fundamental damage to our societies and our economies.
It's absolutely unconscionable and unthinkable to me that these people would knowingly. I don't care how much of an ally we are. If you're asking me to implement policies that will be not just detrimental to the well-being of my household, but almost fatal, I would say, listen, if that's your position, and it's not, and you've done your appraisal on the outcome in your household, okay, you can do this. That will not bother our friendship. But don't force me or try to force me to put bullets in all chambers of the gun and put it to my head and my family's head, because that means that we're only friends and allies when you need it. What about now that I need it? You're ignoring my needs and my national security and my livelihood and my vitality as an economy, as a nation, as a people, as a culture. How can we be friends and allies when this thing is only a one-way street?
Yeah, and you know, Rasheed, that's exactly the question the Ukrainian people should be asking. How can we be friends and allies? Who's doing the dying out there? Who's doing the dying? It's overwhelmingly Ukrainian people. Mm-hmm. Is there any hope of them winning this war? Not a hope in hell. That's obvious to anybody, military or non-military observers who are paying attention and have an ounce of objectivity. There was no hope that this offensive was going to succeed. They didn't have sufficient air power. They didn't have sufficient artillery. They weren't sufficiently well trained. The Russians were too well dug in. They telegraphed what they were going to do, and Western governments pushed the Ukrainian government into launching this offensive, and tens of thousands of Ukrainian men are dead, and the front line has barely moved an inch. And they have the audacity, Western governments have the audacity to call themselves the allies of the Ukrainian people. It's disgraceful. They're like you said, with friends like that, who needs enemies, man? This is going to end in the destruction of that country. It's absolutely depraved what we're doing to Ukraine.
And then they're doubling down and quadrupling down on failed policies. It's like they're going in the room, all of the Western leaders are going into the room, just putting their hands in a hat, not looking at what they're pulling out, and just throwing it up against the wall to see if anything will stick. What is happening right now, and someone needs to tell them, is that this is the undoing and the unraveling of American power, of NATO power, because what we see right now, even through all of the propaganda, we see Russia. You remember they told us that Russia was a has-been power that could not project itself past its borders. And then at the same time, they told us that Russia was a threat. But what you're seeing now is Russia grinding down what we would say a de facto NATO power for the fourth time and beating Ukraine in all of the Western world militarily and economically and politically on a global scale. Now, if we're seeing this and the United States is saying, hey, we must stick with this policy and we must stay with Ukraine as long as possible, but we have a more pressing problem with China. Think about this. China's industrial and military capacity dwarfs that of Russia by multiple times. And they did a report saying that China's shipbuilding outproduces the U.S. by 238 times military shipbuilding capacity. How can you expect to win the war on somebody's door when they can manufacture weapons at will? And for every loss that you take, it takes you 5 to 10 years to replace that loss. Every loss that they take, they can multiply the ship. If they lose one, they can put 6 into the battlefield. And they're on their home turf. Plus, they're your largest financer, your largest banker, your largest manufacturer, your largest trade partner, and 93 to 95% of all goods on your shelves come from them. How can you even think that you can wage an effective war against a power like that?
Totally, absolutely. And by the way, if a war breaks out in the South China Sea because of its importance to international shipping, the global economy is going to be plunged into a depression just by virtue of that alone. And there's one other factor I would add to that excellent list that you gave of all the reasons why, it's insanity. It's insanity for the United States government to be talking about going to war with China. And that is that the Chinese military industry is largely state-owned. This is very important. This is one of the reasons, and that's also true of Russia, by the way. Russia's military budget before the invasion began in February of last year was less than 10% of the United States military budget. It was something like 1/15 of NATO's military budget. And they're taking on the whole of NATO. The whole of NATO. They gave an amount of weaponry which on paper was worth the entire annual military budget of Russia. And Russia's still winning. Now, why? Why is this important that it's state-owned? Because that means that they're not trying to make a profit.
Right.
And so you can get, the amount of, you take two sets of military equipment, one is being produced by a state-owned enterprise and the other is being produced by a for-profit corporation that has been getting away with gouging the government for decades. You can be sure that on a dollar-for-dollar basis, the state-owned enterprises are going to produce a lot more weaponry. So even though on paper it appears that the United States and NATO have much larger military budgets than China and Russia, in fact, the differences are not nearly as great as appear. This accounts for the fact that they are unable to defeat even Russia. Can you imagine what would happen if they tried to take on Russia and China at the same time? I mean, they couldn't even beat the Taliban, for God's sake. I mean, come on. Soviet era, 20 years they spent, and the Taliban had nothing more than Soviet era small arms, and they ran the whole of NATO. The whole of NATO ran from Afghanistan with its tail between its legs, and we're supposed to believe that these people can defeat Russia and China? I mean, come on, man. What planet do we live on? I mean, it's just common sense. It's common sense that this is a pipe dream. And what we need, Rasheed, at the end of the day in the West is we need peaceful democratic regime change on a massive scale. We need to clean these bums out of office, because we go down this path, we continue to allow them to decide the future of our countries. There is no future for our countries.
The military industrial complex is built on grift and washing the other person's hands and corruption and greed and bribery. The reason the U.S. military budget is so huge is because I was looking at one report. It was saying hammers they use in building certain things were like $200. Toilet seats were like $1,000. A screw was like $50 to $100. And then the government knows this, but the kickbacks, and they don't understand that this helps. First of all, it gives you a false sense of domination because your military budget is way bigger than everybody else. It gives you a false sense of pride that you can be able to deal with threats, when in reality, there's the weaponry that you are making is inferior to what you publicly state. And this puts you in a bad position, not just economically, but militarily, when you have to use this, as we can see when they went to war in Iraq. Scott Ritter told me that the United States said that they had intercepted Scuds, but they didn't. The Patriots failed. They didn't intercept the Scuds and stuff. So
yeah, you're not hearing about Patriots anymore, man.
Right.
Nobody talks about the Patriots in Ukraine anymore. What happened to them? What happened to them?
And speaking of Patriots, I was looking at, I'm glad we're on this subject. I was looking at a report 3 days ago, and I was reading, and I could not believe what I was reading. And they were saying that the Patriot success rate was 6 to 8%. 6 to 8%. Hey, I could put a blindfold on and get a rock, and I'll do better than that. 6 to 8%. And you're spending billions of dollars, and then you're putting these tests together, and these are controlled tests where the missile knows where the other missile is going, and then you slow one missile down so the other one can hit it, and then you use that in a video so that you can package this and force sell it on so-called allies and people that really don't know what's going on. That's why when Turkey was first into looking for an anti-aircraft system, they actually did not choose the Russian. They chose the Chinese version. And the United States said that was absolutely unacceptable for Turkey to choose the Chinese air defense system. And so the U.S. put pressure on Turkey to renege on the deal that they were signing with the Chinese. And so Russia entered the fray. And Turkey knew that, hey, if I get these air defense systems from the West, I'm going to be in some trouble. So I'm just going to take this heat, and I'm going to get the Russian air defense system because those are the best in the world. The Chinese the reason the Chinese deal was so much better is because the Chinese air defense system that they were offering was an upgraded version of the S-300, but with technology transfer. And the United States did not want Turkey to have that. And speaking of that, why is it that Turkey is a NATO ally. I need to ask these questions while I have you. Why is it that Turkey is a NATO ally, and it's the only NATO ally that is not afforded NATO air defense systems on a continuous basis on its territory, and it is blocked out of the F-35 airplane, I would say, scheme, and the United States have withheld Turkey's plea to get F-35s, and yet Israel has multiple F-35 and are acquiring more and is not a treaty member to NATO. How is it that I'm your NATO ally, which I am required to respond to any threat to you, but I'm saying that I have persistent threats here, and you are ignoring my national security issues? Could it be that I'm the only Muslim nation in NATO, and you don't want me to have that privilege that everybody else has? I mean, what is with this?
Look, I think you hit the nail on the head, man. Like, you know, let's look at Turkey's relationship with the European Union. They were telling Turkey for years that they were going to let Turkey into the European Union, and they were blowing smoke up Turkey's ass. It was absolutely crystal. Now they're not even in negotiations about it anymore, because it became absolutely crystal clear that they weren't going to let Turkey into the European Union. Why didn't they do that? Might it have something to do with the fact that Turkey is a predominantly Muslim country? I think so. And that would be a perfectly plausible explanation for why they're depriving Turkey of certain so-called advanced weapons that they're prepared to sell to countries in Western Europe and elsewhere that are not predominantly Muslim. I think there's a fundamental element of, you know, white supremacy and Christian supremacy in all of this. We should never underestimate the degree to which that infects the thinking of people at the highest level of governments in the West. And so I think a good part of the reason why we're pursuing the policies we're pursuing in Ukraine is Russophobia. There's an intense hatred of the Russian people in the halls of power of the West. And this has been true for, you know, my entire lifetime, frankly. So that to me is the most plausible explanation. At the end of the day, you know, Turkey, I think if it was actually acting in its own long-term interest, I'm not even sure what the thinking is behind the Turkish government for remaining in NATO. Why are they in NATO now? Especially, I could understand that previously, but with the rise of the BRICS and the fact that it's very clear that the era of U.S. hegemony is coming to an end, and that there's a tremendous shift in both military, political, and economic power from the West to the East. Now is the time for the Turkish people to look very seriously at redefining their relationship with the West, including and particularly NATO. Unfortunately, I don't see any indication of that in the Erdogan government.
You know, I believe this about because I've seen certain little clues and signs. I believe that they're trying to get as much as they can from the West. They understand that they only serve this purpose. Turkey is the second largest and most powerful military in NATO. They know that, and they know that they serve a purpose for the West because geographically it lies right at the Dardanelles Strait.
Yes, they control entrance into the Black Sea.
They control entrance, and they know that that they, even with all of this bickering between NATO members, they know that they still hold sway there. But if you look beyond this, Turkey is integrating its economies with China, with Russia, with Iran, with the East. But you can't do it all at once, because look what happened 2 years ago, a year ago, when Turkey moved a little bit too fast. The United States waged currency war on the Turkish lira and started sanctioning Turkey's key industries, which started inflation to skyrocket across Turkey. So I believe they had to do a reappraisal. I'm not saying, I'm just giving you my observation of what I see going on. I don't think that Turkey will be a NATO member forever. I don't think that, because how can you, when you're a second class NATO citizen, when you're not afforded the rights and the weaponry that all of the other ones are afforded? Think about this, and we'll switch subjects to China and more things that are going on. But think about this. when the United States sold Turkey all of her F-16s, they wouldn't sell them the F-15 now. They only sold them the F-16s. They sold them with a friend or foe guidance on there. Turkey was the only NATO nation to be forced to buy them where they could not fire on NATO on any NATO ally or any Israeli warplanes. It took Turkish engineers to go around that and reroute that so that they would have the freedom to fire on anybody. So to me, that's telling me that you want me at an disadvantage to you and the rest of everybody. You want my military to be at a disadvantage just in case I buck up against you on some key issues. I won't be able to defend myself. I don't have air defense systems. My warplanes won't fire against you. So my skies would be yours for the taking. So I believe that the strategic thinkers know these things, but they have to buy their time, the same as they had to buy their time with the coup that took place, the NATO instigated coup. You know, they had to the snakes show the head, cut them in, cut the heads off.
Your interpretation is entirely, I think it's very persuasive. I think that may well be what's going on. And I think the only other thing I would add to your excellent analysis is that in Turkey, there continues to be a sizable number of people who want to be Western oriented. They want the country to be Western oriented. And in fact, Erdogan, as you probably know, came very close to losing the most recent election. And the people who were opposed to Erdogan are predominantly Turks who are very Western oriented. So he also has, it's not just the external pressures, which you mentioned, but he's also got domestic political considerations to bear in mind. So maybe that is the long-term vision for the Turkish elite, that they see their country eventually gradually gravitating to the east. That certainly does seem to be the most sensible thing for them in the long term. Now,
what is going on with Niger, with France, with Mali, with Gabon, with Burkina Faso? What is going on? It seems like it's been swept out of the news now that France didn't get its way. And again, I was reading an article, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit. The French president said that in the next weeks to months, that they would remove all embassy staff. Now, they were supposed to have a minimum staff. Why would it take weeks and months to evacuate an embassy staff that is at its bare minimum? And on top of that, in closing in that statement, he said, and all military cooperation has stopped or ceased. And in months to the end of the year, we will bring troops home. Why can't you bring them home now when you're only supposed to have 1,500 there?
First of all, this is again a great question. The fact that he's merely saying they're going to come home at all is a huge capitulation, because he wasn't saying that at the beginning. He's basically, you're not the legitimate government. We don't recognize you. We're not going anywhere. Not just the military personnel. Our diplomatic staff isn't going anywhere. Then people got in the streets. It started getting pretty hairy down there, I imagine, for the French diplomatic staff and the 1,000 or so soldiers who are in Niger. All of a sudden, you had irate Nigerians all around demanding that they leave the country. And behind the scenes, I don't know this for a fact, but I think this threat that ECOWAS, the economic community of West African states, made to intervene militarily to remove the coup government from power, it turned out to be a bunch of hot air. And it became increasingly apparent that the Western, I think those governments, by the way, in ECOWAS, a lot of them are concerned that they may be next. And that if they intervene militarily in Niger or Burkina Faso and any one of those countries, they may incite their own populations to turn on them. There's a real, as far as I can tell, I'm no expert on, West Africa, but as far as I can tell, there is a real and genuine surge of anti-colonialism and nationalism of the good kind, not nationalism that results in, persecution of minorities, but nationalism as in we demand our sovereignty be respected finally once and for all. You got away with replacing your colonial regime with this fraudulent neo-colonial regime, which you didn't call colonialism, but that's what it was. It was just colonialism under a new guise. We are fed up with that, and it's time for you to leave. Now, what's really interesting about this, I think that's very real. It's very genuine, and it's inspiring, frankly, to see this happening in Africa. But there's another school of thought, and some of this is reflected in the French press. I saw an article in Le Monde along these lines where they're questioning whether this is all somehow being orchestrated by the United States. The United States, according to some people in the West, some geopolitical observers, may be maneuvering to replace France as the neo-colonial power in West Africa. There could be some truth to that. Certainly the United States government is capable of that. But I think at the same time, there is a really genuine, powerful swelling up of, demand for sovereignty, for the respect of the sovereignty of West African nations. And whether or not France ultimately leaves, I think probably what's going on is Macron is trying to draw out the withdrawal of his military forces for as long as possible, just in case he can pull some rabbit out of the hat somewhere. Maybe he can persuade Nigeria or some other West African state or states to intervene militarily. So far, it doesn't appear that that's working. So he's trying to draw it out. But the mere fact that he ultimately made that commitment is a massive humiliation for France. France has been revealed to be a geopolitical pipsqueak. That's exactly what it is. It can't even maintain dominance in West Africa, where it basically had carte blanche. Another thing that was really interesting about this is that Algeria, which is for decades was a colony of France, as we all know, its government came out and said flatly that they weren't going to support any military intervention in Niger, which I'm sure left the Macron government deeply unhappy with the Algerian government. So in Algeria as well, they're showing a degree of independence, which is unusual, even by recent standards. And all of this, of course, to some degree, I think is being encouraged by what's happening globally, by the rise of the BRICS. African states now have alternatives. They can now look around and say, there are other countries we can do business with that aren't going to exploit us ruthlessly the way you did. So guess what? We don't want to do business with you anymore. They didn't have that alternative for a long time. So this is a very, very powerful phenomenon, and one that I'm personally very heartened to see. And I hope that it spreads to other countries in West Africa. That would be a wonderful thing to behold.
France announced the removal of the French ambassador from Niger, and then the eventual reassignment of the staff and the military from Niger. But this happened after they tried to instigate a coup in Burkina Faso, the strong man of the alliance. They wanted to overthrow Captain Torrejo because they see him as a symbol of African independence and African pride and African power. And they tried to instigate a coup with him because they still had some operatives in the military, but they failed in what they tried to do. And only after that did they announce that they were going to pull out from Niger. But with that said, you go back to something you said about the United States could be something like trying to push France out. Well, we know the United States plans never really happen the way they really plan them out. So they may have those intentions, but that's not really how it happens, So, let me put something up. I see something. Let's see if I can. Oh, okay. Hold on one second. For everybody's in the chat, my StreamYard post is going slower. So Dimitri and I are getting them slower than what you're getting, what you're putting out. So please charge it to our head and not to our hearts. We really appreciate it. But Auntie Ann, thank you. She has a question, and then I'll get back to something I had to say. She says, question about BRICS Plus. If they're utilizing the BIS associated central banks, how is that legitimately de-dollarizing anyone? BIS is Western control. Do you want to take the question?
I'll let you fire away on this one if you want to go
first.
Well,
they're utilizing this right now. If you go to an article, matter of fact, 2 articles came out. I believe it was yesterday or day before yesterday. One in Press TV and one in RT. One in Sputnik and one in Press TV. And one was being reported by Iran and one was being reported by Russia. And they were talking about how all of these BRICS nations and all of the global South nations that have their own independent monetary system are linking up, and they're aiding the ones who are trying to. But until then, they will still be trying to use, the most convenient one until to the weaker nations are able to formulate their own. And then once those nations formulate their own, they'll connect it all in a system that will supplant SWIFT. And I believe that system is the Chinese Union Pay system, because that has a global reach. Mir has a reach, but Union Pay, the Chinese Union Pay, outstrips Visa and MasterCard. So I believe that would be one of the mechanisms for that. And to give you an example, Auntie Ann, when a baby is born, the baby may see you walking, and the baby may want to walk and run, but the baby has to crawl, and then it has to pull itself up a little bit and take some shaky little steps and fall back down and take a few shaky little steps, and then finally, when it gets settled, it starts walking a little bit at a time, and then when it gets proficient with walking like that, then it goes into running. And I believe that is the idea that the BRICS nations and the BRICS Plus nations are using as they try to put together their financial and economic system that will supplant the Western dominated SWIFT system. What say you on the matter?
The only thing I'll add is just to follow up on the metaphor you use of the baby crawling. There's a lot of great analysis on a website called Naked Capitalism, and the founder of the website, Eve Smith, who's been talking about de-dollarization. This really is a long-term process. It's not just about international trade. The US dollar permeates the global economy, and it's going to take quite some time for it to be displaced as the global reserve currency. And I don't think that the leaders of the BRICS countries have any illusions about that. They're trying to go about this in a very methodical, careful manner without causing undue disruption to their own economies and to international trade flows. And it's going to be probably a decades-long process.
And Auntie Annie says this also, and I'll let you, I don't know if it was a question or a statement, but I'll let you handle this one. She says BIS is Bank for International Settlements. Well, yes,
that's right.
Yes. Yeah. Excuse me. But a lot of nations right now, even though they use BIS, a lot of them are doing currency swap agreements, bilateral trade agreements that are outside of the SWIFT dominated system and the US dominated financial architecture. And this is what's rattling the cage of the UK, the US, and NATO, because I continue to tell everybody, the London Gold Exchange is the center of the gold world. And the New York Exchange is tied to that. And if China is supplanting that with the Shanghai Gold Reserve, Russia has now oil bourse. Iran has an oil bourse, and Iran has a gold exchange now, and Russia is setting up a gold exchange. These are methods to ensure, I would say, stability in the upcoming financial system, because gold is the ultimate insurer of stability. And what's this guy named Sergei Glaziev? I think that's his name, from Russia. Talked about he talked about a commodities-based system. Well, when you look at South Africa, one of the largest producers of gold and has some of the largest gold and platinum reserves. You see Russia, one of the largest producers of gold and have one of the largest platinum reserves. You have China, the largest producer of gold. Then you see all of these nations that are in BRICS and BRICS Plus, and then they will expand BRICS Plus next year. These nations have a huge potential to have a commodity-based system that will supplant the dollar. And I think they're doing it step by step by step until you see the house. When you look at the house being built, at first you just see a open slate, and then you see them putting in framing and plumbing, and then you see them putting up the sheetrock and the electrical and all of this. And before you know it, months after month, they put in the finishing touches, and you'll say, wow, that's a beautiful house. I didn't think that house was going to be that beautiful when I first saw it. I think that's what's going on right now in the financial system. What say you on the matter?
Yeah, and I just add that I think they're just laying the foundation right now. They are not even at the point of erecting the walls, the structure, the frame of the house. They're laying the foundation. That in and of itself is going to be a major challenge. But if you see the share of the U.S. dollar in international trade, it is slowly ticking down. It still is huge, but there's definitely a downward trend. So they're making progress. And the real question, I think, is at what point, does this become highly problematic for the U.S. economy? At what point does the sort of disintegration of the U.S. dollar's status as the global reserve currency become so critical that the United States economic system can no longer continue to be sustained on the current basis? I don't know I don't think anybody really knows the answer to that question. And it could cause a crisis, a massive dislocation in the U.S. economy, a lot sooner than people think. This is extraordinarily complex, but it is a momentous development in international affairs.
And I don't think people are looking at it. I don't think they're looking at it in the light of what it is. This is truly astronomical and unbelievable that in your lifetime, you're seeing the greatest, the most powerful, and the richest nation that we've known in the last 5,000-6,000 years, and its system of governance being supplanted by something else. There's a great paradigm shift underway, and this is causing the Western world to be dislodged from their position as the hegemon. This is causing them to lash out. And so they're throwing crap up against the wall to try to stop China's rise and break out. They're trying to prevent Russia's reemergence on the global stage. They're trying to prevent Iran from growing from a global power into a global power, from a regional power to a global power. So,
and they're trying to stop Africa from shaking off the shackles of neocolonialism.
And I'm glad you said that, because I was going to get to that. And it brought me back to something. So everybody talks about China being the manufacturer to the world, and because of its industrial base. What most people don't know, and Carl Czar, who is a geopolitical analyst, is specifically and especially on Chinese and Asian affairs, he and I both agree that China set Africa up to be the manufacturing capacity or the manufacturing center for China. So America sees that, and they look. Africa has always been the mammary gland of the West, and that's where, when they got hungry, they went to suck from, and they needed resources from. And now, with the emergence of leaders like Troy, I think I'm pronouncing his name wrong, but anyway, from Burkina Faso and all of these other leaders, it becomes a threat to Western hegemony because of the free or nearly free labor, brain power, and resources that France and the colonial powers extracted. I was looking at a report that said that France was extracting uranium for not just France, but for all of Europe. And they were paying pennies on the dollars. They were paying Niger $1. And when they took, I'm just giving you an example, $1. And they would go and they would sell it for $11 or refine it and sell it for even more. This is strong arm robbery. This is theft at the highest level.
And what's 80% of the people of Niger don't have electricity? I mean, this is like a step above enslavement. I mean, it's absolutely disgusting that this has been going on for so long. And, we should all be cheering the end of this grotesque exploitation of Africa. What they've done to Africa is absolute, appalling, disgusting. We should all hang our heads in shame in the West. Our wealth is built largely upon, we talk about our economic model as though it's superior. The reason why we have more wealth in the West is because we have a superior economic model. Actually, it has to do more with just brutal oppression and, rancid exploitation of peoples around the world, particularly in Africa. And also, of course, indigenous peoples in South America and North America, what we call North and South America today. That's where the wealth of the West largely comes from. And the world is waking up to this now. And they've had enough of it. And they have alternatives. So I think the writing is on the wall. Western hegemony is over. The only problem is that they haven't realized this yet in the halls of power of the West. And they're, like you said, they're throwing shit up on the wall and hoping something sticks.
I want to play a clip for you. And I know time may be limited for you, but I want to play a clip for you. And I played this clip about maybe 10 shows ago. And I want to share this with you because I want you to see the former Greek minister he's being questioned about China's presence in Africa, and this Western so-called journalist or reporter is outraged. Now, they're not outraged when France goes in there. They're not outraged when Italy and Spain and the UK and the US and Canada and Germany goes in there, because Canada, I might add, has a military base in Africa also. But they're outraged that China has gone into Africa and built up high-speed railway infrastructure, colleges. They're doing transfer of technology. They're training engineers, scientists, doctors, lawyers, and stuff like that. They're outraged over that, and they call it a debt trap. But I want you to listen to how this Greek former minister puts this person into is put the whole thing in its proper perspective and literally shuts up the Western journalists, because this is priceless here. So here we are right here. Let me play.
They're in Africa. They're lending money to countries to build ports and different infrastructure.
To build what?
Port.
And
harbors.
what's wrong with that?
And well, because
countries that need ports get ports.
But they're making people dependent on. I mean, I know it's the same thing that we've done, which is
no, it's
horrible
not.
Around the world.
They are far more humanistic than the United States ever was.
Really?
Welcome to Candid Africa, truthful and unapologetic.
I'm been very concerned lately about China. They are now all over Africa, buying things and investing over there and getting those countries dependent on them and supporting, non-democratic people. And I'm just
like
wondering,
whom?
Well,
we are in a country that supports Saudi Arabia.
Yes, that's true. Right. So
suddenly we have a problem with, superpowers supporting non-democratic people.
Yes, I do. They're in Africa. They're lending money to countries to build ports and different infrastructure.
To build what?
Port.
And
harbors.
what's wrong with that?
And well, because
countries that need ports get ports.
But they're making people dependent on. I mean, I know it's the same thing that we've done, which is
no, it's
horrible
not.
Around the world.
They are far more humanistic than the United States ever was.
Really? Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. So.
Let me give you an example. Of course, they are peddling for influence.
Yeah.
Yeah. But they are non-interventionist. Absolutely non-interventionist in a way that Europeans, the West, has never managed to fathom. When it comes to the influence of China outside its borders, I have to say, firstly, it's quite remarkable that they don't seem to have any military ambitions. Secondly, Africa. I'll give you an example, a specific example. Ethiopia. 2004, because I happened to be there, and I have some first-hand experience of it. They went into Ethiopia. I'll tell you why they went into Ethiopia, because they suspected there was oil. Because China is a major industrial power, but it lacks primary resources. Now, instead of going into Africa with troops, colonially, destroying the country, killing people like the West has done for the last 100 years, what they did was they went to Addis Ababa and they said to the government, we would like, we can see you have problems with your infrastructure. We would like to build some new airports, upgrade your railway system, create a telephone system, and rebuild your roads. And we'll do this all for free. No strings attached. We don't want anything from you. And they did. Why did they do it? Because this is soft power. Because because they knew that if oil is discovered, and it was discovered later, then, of course, the Ethiopian government will be much more open to Chinese oil companies coming there. They have never combined their investment with imperialistic. Can you imagine if that was a German company or an American company? That's why I'm saying I don't think you should worry.
Okay, I won't.
There we have it. Let us know if you liked or hated what you heard in the comments below.
So, we're waiting for Dimitri to come back. I think he he is busy at this moment, but he'll be right back in the booth. So again, we've seen the hypocrisy of the West on display at an unimaginable scale. And as I say often, the reason that we're seeing these skirmishes and scrimmages between Eastern and Western blocs and Eastern and Western powers is because you have one ascending and one descending. Did you finish hearing the video clip about how the former Greek minister actually put things in the proper perspective and shut the journalists up in words?
Yeah. So Yanis Varoufakis was, the finance minister in the left-wing Syriza government that came to power in Greece in January 2015 for the first time. It's interesting to know his background. He led Greece during the first 6 months of 2015 in negotiations with the IMF and the European Commission and the European Central Bank, which came to be known as the Troika of Greece's creditors, to try to relax the austerity requirements they had imposed upon Greece, which had caused a depression-era level of economic contraction, some 25%. And it's Greece, where I am now, has never recovered from the austerity imposed upon it by these Western financial institutions, and it got to the point where they were basically telling this democratically elected government, "We don't care what the Greek people want. We know you ran on a platform of relaxing the austerity. We're just not interested in doing that." And then the prime minister of Greece, the leader of Syriza, held a referendum and on austerity, asking the Greek people, "Do you want to accept this or not?" And the Greek people, to the amazement of a lot of observers, including myself, overwhelmingly voted no, even though they were being threatened with expulsion from the European, the Eurozone, and the devastation of their economy. And the next day, the day after the referendum, Tsipras just went ahead and agreed to even worse austerity. The prime minister of Greece, who had been elected on an anti-austerity platform, agreed to even worse austerity than the Greek people had rejected in the referendum. And that very day, that man you just saw on the screen, Yanis Varoufakis, resigned as the finance minister of Greece. This man knows very well what colonialism and exploitation is all about and how Western financial institutions actually work. He speaks from experience. He also, by the way, is somebody who describes himself as an erratic Marxist, whatever that means. But he clearly has, a very powerful critique of Western hegemony and the capitalist economic system that prevails over much of the world. So I completely agree with everything that he said. And I think what's most remarkable, I'm not surprised by anything that Yanis Varoufakis said in that clip. What I think is most remarkable is the sheer ignorance of the person he was speaking to. God, this person needs to stop drinking the Kool-Aid. He's literally drunk on it. I mean, it's embarrassing that people show up at events and ask, in the West, and ask questions like that. They just show really they're simply they're placing complete faith in the media narratives that are being peddled to them, even though we have a mountain of evidence that the media systematically lies to us about what's happening in the world. And that's sad. Sad to see that. I'm sorry. I really need to go, Rasheed.
I was getting ready to thank you for coming on. We'll do this again. Thank you so much. You've extended it 10 minutes further than what you should have, but thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. I'll contact you. I'll send you a copy of the video. Hey, man, be blessed and be safe.
Thank you. It's a pleasure for having me on. I'd love to talk to you anytime. Let me know.
All right. Be blessed, man. Everybody, listen. Thank you all. Hit the like button. Hit the like button. It doesn't cost anything to hit the button and share the thing. If you don't like the show, hit the dislike button. And I would like to sit here and talk to you for a few minutes before we go off the air. I would like to ask you to subscribe, to like, to share, to comment, to be a part of the chat. And if you're able to join the Patreon, to join the locals. It's free. The locals is free. You can join the Rumble. Also, you can become a channel member. Now, listen, we're going to try to start doing something. If we can figure out we've been having problems, we want to start streaming exclusively to Rumble at least one time a week, and we're working on that. And we want to start streaming at least one time a week to locals exclusively. So we're working on that also. And we want you to be a part of that, and don't miss that. Both are free. So go to the Rumble, go to the locals and join the empowermentoftruth.locals.com and go to rumble.com/the Red Pill Diaries. But anyway, we're not done yet, so don't leave, okay? I want to address something. I saw something in the news. Now, there is a an article out in RT. And this article says Ukraine has no chance without U.S. This is what the MP says. Kiev should commit to joining Washington's wars abroad in exchange for continued military assistance, Alexei Goncharenko says. Now, stop right there for a minute. Wars abroad. First of all, how are you going to do that when you're hemorrhaging manpower from lack of manpower? How can you join Washington wars abroad when Washington supplies you with weapons and they are telling you that they can no longer supply you with weapons? When the entirety of NATO can no longer supply you with an unlimited stream of weapons that seem to not work as well as advertised. So on one hand, you're saying that, hey, we need Washington's help. We cannot win without Washington. And in exchange for that, we'll go on all of your military escapades around the world and do as you say. Do you see where this is leading? This is leading to uncontrollable global war. This is what the empire wants. See, somebody said it beautifully in the chat. Let me go back and see if I can pull it up real quick, because I know the chat goes real quick. Somebody said it really beautiful, and I put it up on the screen. And let's see. Give me a second. It says, all right, here it is. I think it was Mehdi. Mehdi says this. Here is something to think about. The U.S. is beyond recovery because of its debt. The only way to get rid of its debt is war with the country you owe the money to. You win, you owe nothing. This is what, and then listen to what he says right here, which is very rational and very truthful. I want you to listen to this. He follows it up with this. You lose, your economy was going to crash anyway. That's how these people think. That is absolutely a mic drop moment, because that is absolutely their way of thinking. This is why they are so hell-bent on waging war with China. They're at the blackjack table, and they've been losing, constantly. I gotta take my children's college fund, maybe, and they lose the children's college fund. Or I gotta take my 401k fund. They're losing that. They have their car. They've pawned the car. Now, the only thing they have left to try to salvage their livelihood, or else take the gun to their head, boom, is to now put the house note up on the blackjack table, and you're saying, oh, I know I got it this time. I finally realized. I know I lost the other times, but I finally got it. I got the system. And if I hit this one time, it'll all be worth it, because listen, if I don't hit it, I lose everything. I lose my family. I lose my house. I lose my 401k. I lose my retirement. I lose everything. Everything. That is the mind state that these people have. And Mehdi summed it up so precise and perfectly that it's a mic drop moment. You have to think about that. This is why the policies are so irrational. So knee-jerk responses, out of the blue responses to everything. On the one hand, you send Janet Yellen to China to beg for them to buy debt. And then while Janet Yellen is about to leave China, you send warships through the Taiwan Strait. On the one hand, you said there will be no Ukrainian capitulation. And on the other hand, you send feelers out to Russia to see if they're willing to put a pause to the war, because you're reeling from the war and you need a breath. You need to take a breath. But Russia saying no breath, no breathers. The last time we gave you a breather, you rearmed them in 2014, and you allowed them to be unleashed on the Russian population. No breather. We are watching something that is frightful, that is scary, but sometimes things that are frightful and scary, when looked at in the scheme of things, can be beautiful. We're watching an entire economic, military, and political and cultural architecture, global architecture, be removed from the scene globally. Never in 100 years did you think that America would be in this position. Tell me somebody 20 years ago thought that the great unrivaled hyperpower, because remember, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, America was feeling itself. The Western world was feeling itself. America was no longer a peer or equal among two superpowers. America had become a hyperpower, according to her. Google this. Meaning that she had no peer. She had no equals. She had no near peers. She was feeling herself, ignoring international law, ignoring national sovereignty, ignoring the wills and whims of the people and the nations at the UN and around the globe. She was doing that at will, ad nauseum. And now she's trying to forge the AUKUS. She's trying to forge the Quad. She's trying to do everything to try to maintain what little hegemony that she still has, what little vestige of hegemony that she still has. But one must remember that in this scheme of things, Jim Rogers, Peter Schiff, Gregory Mannarino, and a host of other ones have laid bare America's cupboards. And they have announced that America is the greatest and the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. Now, that sounds like America if she controls her spending. If America controls her spending, if America could just rein in her spending and focus on domestic policies, then she can overcome this. Listen to me good. In math, you have an equation that gets to 10, the number 10. I don't care how you sum it up. You say 1 plus 4 plus 5 is 10. 1 plus 9 is 10. 5 plus 5 is 10. 2 times 5 is 10. I don't care which route you use. The eventual destination is 10. So I don't care what America does. Her debt gives us the route of her eventual destination. Remember what happened to the Romans. Remember what happened to the British, the Swedes, the French. Anybody that was a global power in the annals of history in the last 6,000 years, what was their destination when they got on this debt train and they unleashed unbelievable debt? What was the destination? Imperial decline and eventual collapse. That is a mathematical certainty. So think about this. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, as I played to you all on the 2 previous shows, the professor of economics 10 to 12 years ago said that at that time, America had $222 trillion in debt. And they said it was 3 times the amount of the global economy. Listen to me good. I'm saying this for a reason, because I want to put something on your mind before we leave out, okay? And at that time, America's acknowledged debt was $11 trillion. Years later, we go and we say she was at $22 trillion debt. Remember that a few years ago? So that means at the minimum, we doubled the $222 trillion, which makes it $444 trillion, right? Now, what did America just acknowledge last week? that the U.S. debt now stands at $33 trillion. So now we go from 11 to 22 to 33. Those are trenches of 11. So the debt at minimum is $666 trillion. Look, I mean, that's significant. 666. That's significant. These are the numbers of her creation, and these will be the number of her downfall. Listen to what I'm telling you. The debt is so astronomical that if you put all of the global economies together, all of the economies around the world, just that alone would lap that multiple times. So America she's in a box. She's damned if she does, and she's damned if she doesn't. But she feels that her only chance, and this is a Hail Mary, like this is football. Let me give you an analysis. Analogy, excuse me. At the end of the football game, you're down, and it's 2 minutes to go. You're down by 10, and you know you need a touchdown, which is 6 points, and a field goal, which is 1 point or a 2-point conversion, and then you want an onside kick so that you can recover the ball and go for a field goal so you can tie the game, or maybe you go for a Hail Mary and you can win the game. But you have no timeouts. You're at the 1 yard line and you got to go 99 yards, and you're saying, hey, but we can do this if we do X, Y, and Z. But listen, that's dependent on the powers outside of your grasp. You know in your mind that it's over, but you're trying to rationalize it with yourself and with your team that, hey, we can win this. It's 2 seconds left on the clock. You're down by 10 points. And you got to march 99 yards with no timeouts. This is the position that America finds herself in economically. Because no matter if every nation in the world join hands and gives their GDP to the United States, her debt is so astronomical that it will lap the GDP of the globe multiple times over. And we're not even talking about the derivative market, which are bets on top of bets. Listen what the derivative market is. And you don't tell me whether or not that what we're in right now is a justification for the removal of this financial and political system globally. The derivative markets are bets on debt. They're bets on bets on bets on bets on debt. I'm going to say that again. They're bets on debt. They're bets on bets on bets on bets on bets on debt. I know that's hard to grasp, but that's what it is. And I recently talked to Greg again, and he was saying that the derivative market is between, when I talked to him last year, it was between 2 and 5 trillion. Now it's between 3 and, there is no number because of all of the derivative bets. So how in the world can you extricate yourself? We're going to give the global economy more than what they are worth. We're going to say $200 trillion for the global economy. How can 200 trillion overcome 5 quadrillion? We're not talking about the 666 trillion in debt. We're talking about the 5 quadrillion. I didn't say trillion. I didn't say 100 trillion. I said quadrillion in debts. It's an impossibility. It's a mathematical impossibility. And when you reach that stage of understanding, you understand that collapse is a mathematical assurity. It's a certainty. And this is the thing that the Western world does not want you to know. They understand. Listen, America's in that position. And then you say, well, why is Europe hitching its wagon to that? It's because they are so invested in this. They are tied. If America coughs, Europe gets the flu. That's why they're in all of these escapades together. That's why they're trying to create chaos. They believe that out of this chaos that they're creating, they will bring in a new order outside of the order that is being brought in by people who are fed up with the system. That's not happening. This is on a hope and a prayer strategy. They are praying that something will help them out. Let's see what Mehdi says. He says, the Red Pill Diaries, you got it, brother. Play it out in game theory and look at history. This has actually happened before. That's what listen, mic drop moment. Listen, I'm not going to even go further on this because this man gets it. He said it. He gets it. He's putting down some poignant points. And listen, so many things are happening which are showing you that it's an improbability, a mathematical impossibility for the Western world to escape the debt crisis. That's why they're always talking about China. China's ready to implode. China's ready to collapse. China's this. China's debt, such and such. Yeah, but they don't tell you that the majority of Chinese debt is held by Chinese citizens. So you're telling me that the Chinese citizens will willfully and willingly do something to prevent the rise of their own nation and to collapse their own economy and destroy their own prosperity when so much of the U.S. debt is held abroad? They want you to be concerned about over there when the house is falling in over here. The sheetrock just hit you on the head. The crown molding is falling down. There was just a hole in your sheetrock. You see the plywood falling off, right? The plumbing just fell out the upper level of your house, and you're concerned about what's going on over there. This is absolutely insanity. And nobody talks and tell you these things the way they should. On this, you're going to get the truth regardless of whether you like it or not. If you don't like it, you don't have to look at it. I want you to look. I want you to be a part of this. I want all of that. I get something. Hold on. Let me look at something. Joel said, hey, Rasheed, if you can get the guys from the Duran on the show, it will be epic. Yeah, it would be. Maybe they would come on. I don't know. Hopefully. I extend an invitation to them right now. Right now. They can come on and we can chop it up and chat it about a whole bunch of things. Because we've got to get to the bottom of this. Everybody is sugarcoating. Everybody. And Jay Blue says, let me put this in. Jay Blue says they are borrowing money from China to give to Ukraine, which reinforces the insanity that I'm talking about. We need to make war with China while borrowing from China, while trading with China, while China is investing in our economy and in our nation. We need to war with them, even though they supply almost all the goods on the shelves of all the stores. If that is not a sign of lunatic policy and insane leadership, tell me what is. Listen, I thank you for joining me today on the most powerful platform for truth, bar none. Remember, as I always say, all of your favorite platforms, this little show right here is your favorite show. I am your favorite show's favorite show. Believe me when I tell you this. On that note, we go out the same way we came in, with love in our hearts for you if you love truth. Know that I love you with everything in my being, but the true and living God, he will always love you better. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. Deuces. I'm out of here.